The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. After he had fed the people, Jesus made the disciples get into a boat and precede him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. After doing so, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When it was evening, he was there alone. Meanwhile, the boat, already a few miles offshore, was being tossed about by the waves, for the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, he came toward them, walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. "It is a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. At once Jesus spoke to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter said to him in reply, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." Peter got out of the boat and began to walk on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw how strong the wind was, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus stretched out his hands and caught Peter and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" After they got into the boat, the wind died down. Those who were in the boat did him homage, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
There was a young man who was driving to a job interview, a job he really wanted, but he was running late. He didn't want to make a bad impression, so he was concerned about finding a parking spot. So he said a prayer. He said, "God, if you help me find a parking spot, I will go to Mass every Sunday." And he finished his prayer and he looked up and there was a parking spot right in front of the business. And he said, "Oh, never mind, God, I found one on my own." The disciples were in a pretty serious situation. The conditions were rough on the lake, and even the boat was in danger. The way it was being tossed about by the waves, the wind was against it, and getting out of the boat was an even riskier thing to do. Sometimes we look at God as a crisis manager. We go our way when things are going well. Then we hit some problem. Could be a health issue, a storm, or a loss of some type. Suddenly we want God to intervene. Then, once we're past the crisis, we go back to our usual way and wait for the next crisis to call upon God. Our boat is the usual way we've always done things. And Jesus calls us to come out of our boat. Our boat is going along with the currents of this world. There are storms the boat must weather, but we're used to them. Kind of like Peter as a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee. He faced many storms out there, and he knew how to weather them in the boat. Jesus calls us to step out of our boat, to step out of our usual routine, and to follow his way of love and mercy. He calls us to be the one who forgives, to stop the cycle of violence. He calls us to be concerned about others, especially those that are often overlooked. At times, it will feel like we're trying to walk on water. The wind and the waves will be against us. but Jesus will be with us. There will be times we'll start to sink, but Jesus will be with us there too. And there are times we're going to turn around and get back in the boat because that will feel more secure. And Jesus will just call us to come out of the boat again. We didn't hear the beginning of this gospel story this year because last week we celebrated the Feast of the Transfiguration. A crowd was with Jesus, and the disciples wanted Jesus to dismiss the crowd to go buy food. Jesus told the disciples to give them something to eat themselves. Even though they were on dry land, Jesus was telling them to step out of their boat, step out of their usual routine, and put others first. He asked them what they had. They gave Jesus their food. Jesus blessed it, gave it to the disciples to give to the crowds, and all were fed, and there were leftovers. That's all Jesus asks of us. To step out of our boat, to step out of our usual routine, and to follow his way. To put our gifts into the hands of Jesus and see what can be done.